of the Legends Library podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to the Legends line of the Star Wars books and the expanded universe. And today we have an awesome panel here. This is one we've been looking forward to for some time, which is Supernatural Encounters, guys. So thank you for joining us. So we have the author, Joe Bongiorno, of Supernatural Encounters. So thank you, Joe, for joining us. As well, we have the lead editor, Kyle Rawlings, on the far end there. And as well, another editor, Patrick Lee. So thank you guys for also joining today. So, just to kick things right off. So Joe, how did you get involved with Star Wars?
That's a long story. I should say thank you guys for coming first off, and dark greetings. The story started a long time ago with issue 1 of Gamer magazine, which I think some of you brought today. That was the Marvelous Aliens piece that Rich Hanley and I wrote, which was supposed to be followed up with Cult Encounters and then Supernatural Encounters. The magazine folded before those could be completed, so when Hyperspace came online, which was the paid portion of like the official website, we pitched to Pablo the idea of bringing these to that. He loved the idea. So we moved forward with it. Hyperspace then shut down unceremoniously, which was upsetting to a lot of people, but our stories were sort of left in limbo, along with Abel Pena's Skywalker. So it took till 2014 for us, Rich, Abel, and myself, to re-pitch these stories to Lucasfilm. And they loved the idea. So that's pretty much the origin of where, yeah, Cult Encounters was done. It needed a little work. Supernatural Encounters needed a lot of work. So I basically got permission to just continue working on it until it was put on the schedule. And that's what I did. And hopefully you guys will read it and enjoy it. And yeah.
So if you can give us a little brief summary of what it is as well. I know it's 1,000 pages, so it's hard to be brief, but
yeah, that's hard to summarize. So it's basically the story of origins, but it's also the story of human nature in terms of how we view who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. Ultimately. So it's these existential, spiritual questions about life. And they're put forth in the form of this manuscript that Arthur Hextrafron wrote, and is no longer around, because, spoiler alert, he dies in the very beginning. So,
I mean he was exsanguinated.
That's right. So, there's a debate. One part of the story is a debate about this manuscript, and they all read it there and argue about it incessantly. And the other part, the other faction of the story is the Arhul's journey it's kind of like he's following a trail to determine what exactly went on, and he ends up in outer space, and strange things ensue, as it would. And then the third part of the story is the sort of vision that he receives and some of the information he receives while there as to the ancient past. So, and that I guess we can discuss later is kind of built on the work that Archie Goodwin and Roy Thomas and some of the early Marvel EU authors had begun to seed and build upon, but which they never got to develop, just simply because of the way publishing works. So that's the somewhat summary.
okay.
Yeah.
And how did you get Kyle and Patrick involved?
Kyle and Patrick, this book would not be here without Kyle or Patrick or Ed or Corey or Harry, Ryan, Robert, everybody. And even before that, there was Greg and Luke, Derek, Matt Lentahan. So there were a lot of people involved in making sure this came to pass. But these guys had to read this thing again and again and again, and they have to. I'm not a clean writer, so I write quickly and I like to get the ideas out, and then because there's a lot of things to keep track of, continuity-wise, research-wise, and lore-wise. Yeah.
To keep track of.
And Yeah, so these guys had a lot to to get through, and copious notes and advice and ideas and brainstorming, and it was amazing. I wouldn't have traded that in for anything. I'm actually grateful that it didn't get put on hyperspace, because then this wouldn't have come to pass. I was granted the time, and you guys too, who contributed and supported, granted me the time to do it right, because that's often it's the problem in publishing many times, and why we complain as fans when continuity errors creep in, is that the authors just don't have it, the editors don't have the time to do it, and we did. We were granted that by you guys mainly, and others who weren't able to be here today, to say, all right, well, we've read the beta version, because I released the beta version online years ago. We like this. We want you to do it right. But I couldn't have without these guys and others that aren't here to really kind of help me along.
Go and pass it to Kyle.
Kyle, yeah, nice chat.
The microphone. Okay. Yeah. So and it was funny too, because again we have a podcast called Legends Library Podcast, and I had written a 6 or 7 page essay, something of that nature.
Yeah.
Something of that nature. Of how supernatural encounters could have made a success out of Fate of Jedi, because as we know, it's probably one of the more debated series that were released in recent years. And it was my defense of, I'm like, well, the whole thing could have worked wonderfully if SE was released first, for context, because a great deal of what we see and all that, Abeloth, all of these creatures and whatnot from the Marvel years, because really that series is actually to quote Jason earlier, a love letter to fans of old, really. But unfortunately, I think it went over the heads of a lot of folk. And so basically, write this paper, and I meet Joe on Quora, that website that you mentioned really has questions and whatnot. And we just got talking then, and I just put it forth because I sent you my paper, and you're like, oh. And I was just like, hey, if you ever need help with anything that you're working on, and it started there.
I needed help.
Yeah. And then it took the better part of 3 years, not counting our future adaptation of all that we're going to be doing for an audiobook. But it's been 3 years, and it's probably been the best thing that's ever happened. It led to one of my best friends here. We started the LLC to get this convention happening. And just great minds kept meeting, and Joe forwarded other folk that we got in touch with. Lisa came in, and now it's kind of like a big Star Wars family, and somehow the day is here, and you're here, and I still can't believe that we made it this far. And shout out to everyone, all board members, Catherine, Corinthia, who have been part of this experience as well. So everyone. I'm missing so many people. Right? That's what Patrick can help me out with here.
And you too, Kyle and Patrick. You guys have been amazing. All of your help for LegendsCon. Anyway.
Yeah.
Brief round of applause to our event coordinator, Corinthia.
Thank you, everyone.
It couldn't have happened without you.
I'm just happy to be here.
September 2020, Joe announces Kyle as an editor on Facebook, and I say, I know words too. There's more and less boring ways of being a nerd. I really like the Chicago Manual of Style, and I just wanted the book to look as marketable as possible, even though it's not. Market fiction is very much in the pulp fiction heritage, and there's particular ways of writing that Joe is very, very intimately aware of, and doing some incredible things that go way over my head. And so I just early on, at least, I didn't even do much with the lore. I was just like, well, this is how you would do it in market fiction, and Joe's like, well, I don't want to do it that way. Fair. And then he explains, but people who know so much of the like metatextual things you're drawing on, stuff beyond Star Wars, like the occult and the writing traditions you're drawing on, who know that stuff way better than me. I've seen them, you know, like on the Discord and all that, just be blown away by what you're doing. So I mostly just stayed in my lane of well, let's just be consistent on when we do and do not, you know, capitalize for. So, yeah.
That was fun.
Humans.
Yeah, we had fun. We because it was a back and forth because I was drawing on older pulp traditions. And to that end, I hope you guys will join us for the history of space opera later on today, the panel or presentation, which I have a PowerPoint of, because that's Star Wars didn't spring out of the ground. Like it's part of a much older tradition that goes back to the early 1900s and even older actually, and that's where I wanted to kind of bring it back to its roots a little bit. The particularly in the pages of like Weird Tales, but even in those traditions have older traditions. So there's a lot. There's a lot to this. Star Wars is an amazing phenomena, but it's part of a larger phenomena, and that's you know sort of the love of literature kind of encompasses these different things that you can find, from gothic fiction to detective fiction to mystery to you know, to drama to Shakespeare to there's a lot to it. And so it was fun when we discussed, like, you know, where they say this word doesn't exist. I'm like, actually, yeah, it's in this story you can find. So it was great. You know,
in 1693, the Germans wrote this word in this way, so something of that nature.
Words convey meaning. They can convey mood, and so I like to use words like the authors of old did. So it does make reading a little challenging if you're only used to more casual forms of literature, which don't really employ that. But that's what I was going for, and these guys really helped make it a reality.
Who are some of your favorite characters to write about?
In the previous panel, we were talking about the Marvel UK series. So if some of you were here for that, we mentioned Talani Throws a Shape. And really all of Alan Moore's work in Star Wars, which oddly has been very overlooked. But so Woodsec and Talani and her siblings Cold, Danda Sign, and Splendid App, and Horless. Let's not forget him. Those guys were a blast to write, but they're demigods, and they think a bit alien. I mean, they're relatable in some regards, because if you have siblings, you understand, you know, having differences of opinion. But on a more down-to-earth level, like Arhul and his droid Q9 have this great friendship, and they have slightly different worldviews, because obviously a droid's going to have, an emancipated droid is going to have a different worldview than a human does. So just their debates, they were just a joy to. I don't feel like I wrote them. I feel like I just transcribed what they were saying, and I was just like, wait, repeat that. What did you say? And that's when that flow comes in, and it feels like you're receiving the voices of characters. So those were. But there are many others. I mean, geez, Sindel from the Ewoks.
Yeah.
All of that. There's a lot. Because there's a lot of characters in here. Yeah. So Cody Sunchild. We mentioned that, you know, in the last panel as well. So many from all over, all aspects of Star Wars history. But those were my favorites.
Yeah. Do you have an obscure reference that you put in that, you know, to like just for fun? How many of them as well?
I don't know if there's time.
All of them. Yeah.
Triple digits.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys like obscure Star Wars in any respect, but that was my focus, because I just, you know, these things that sort of tend to go by the wayside and don't get a lot of attention. That's what attracts me. Lost stories or potentially lost stories attract me. That's why I published Heart of the Jedi and several others, Ryder Wyndham's unpublished stories. Like, I don't know, I just have an affinity for things that are neglected or abandoned. Now the entirety of the EU essentially, to some degree, has, but not by us. You know, we're keeping this thing alive. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep these obscure RPG, you know, worlds and characters and histories. I wanted all of that in, whether it was quasi-canonical or, you know, canonical, didn't matter. So that was the thrust of that.
I'll throw in one more comment on that. Oh, well, okay. The fact that you incorporated a lot of Abel's work as well, which was also kind of in that time period of 2014 when they just didn't know what to do with it, and it lives on in your work too. So, as far as crafting that tapestry, so to speak, you make sure that everyone wasn't forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah, Abel's the man. We've been friends for years and years, and this convention was a great opportunity to get to reconnect with him and so many others. It's amazing. But yeah, Abel's had several things that didn't go published by Lucasfilm, and he was kind enough to share that with us, so that I could put these lore aspects into the book, so that it lives on, even though it's not yet available. Actually, that's one thing I do need to ask Abel before we leave here, is if I can publish his unpublished story so that you guys can all have it. There's a few other authors in mind, but he's a big one.
What are some of the titles of those unpublished stories?
You better question for me.
Yeah. You know, it escapes me at the moment. My memory is not the greatest, but afterwards, let's go hunt him down and see if we can talk to him about it.
So if you could tell us more about the trial and why this text was on trial.
Okay. So the text that Hextrafon left behind is this huge, which is the bulk of this, deals with an aspect of history, cosmology, that doesn't accord with the conventional view of history that the majority of Star Wars historians have accepted to be true. It's almost an affront to them. And so that's the debate is amongst those who side with Arhul, or Arhul's work, and those who are opposed to it, and opposed on many different levels. And as some of you have pointed out in your own videos and discussions with me today and yesterday, you know, it does parallel, real world kinds of debates, about life. But I mean, it even also parallels a lot of what happened, with supernatural encounters in the real world, and that was never intended. But so that's what science fiction. That's what great literature is supposed to do. It's supposed to sort of ask questions about the human condition and about the world we live in. And so, it's up to each individual reader to determine, what side of the debates that they come on. But I wanted to frame it in a way that you could, as the reader, you weren't locked into a certain, worldview. You could look at all the different ones being proposed.
If you could tell us more about the ones and the gods and everything.
So the EU has long had these beings called the Celestials, and another group called the Architects. And then in the Clone Wars, there were the Ones that were introduced. Alan Moore, of course, introduced, we mentioned Talatni and Woodsec. And so part of the whole thrust of this was one part of it was to determine, well, how does this all fit together? West End Games has a lot of very disparate views of ancient history. Like there was no cohesion in terms of what really happened back then. What were the cosmic wars that Archie Goodwin, and other authors of that time were talking about. So, I don't remember where the Celestials first appeared. Was that Jason's Warfare, Guide to Warfare?
Someone here will definitely.
Yeah,
know this later,
yeah,
but I thought it was Roger McBride Allen's trilogy.
Oh yeah, the Carillion trilogy. Yeah,
I'm sure that's where it is.
yeah. And that's also where the Q9 series of droids comes from. So yeah, so you got, Star Wars has been publishing, I mean, from '77 until the decanonization, I guess you call it, in 2014. That and in a lot of different sources. I mean, you've got everything from cartoons to video games to RPG stuff. I mean, just the list goes on and on. So it was just a matter of looking at all of that and pulling these threads together and seeing how they could logically make sense, and what it would mean. Like, what are the implications of these entities? What is their role? What is their alignment, to use a Dungeons and Dragons, term? And then there's also, in Marvel issue 5, Darth Vader mentions the immortal gods of the Sith, which the EU never ever developed or touched.
Nope.
Which I was grateful for, because that was something that I could now sort of develop. Who are these immortal gods of the Sith? What role did they play in ancient history? And how does that contrast with the Celestials? Where are the architects in all of this?
I have to wonder if Vader wasn't referring to the original modern Sith, Karnas Mur, Zok, Zoxan, the ones who were banished from the Republic and found their way to Korriban, where they, after King Addis the Black, and acquired hologram technology from Rakata, because been making my own timeline at home. I have to wonder if he was referring to the 4 original Sith Lords, ones before Nagasato, Luno Crash,
The exiles
Yeah.
and their predecessors. Yeah, that's all in there. That's all
who started the
accounted for.
hyperspace wars. Remember that?
That's right. Yeah. That's another thing that I would have loved to have seen as a fan developed. I would have loved to have gotten novels and like a series about them. But we didn't. So what information was out there that I could extrapolate and build on? There are many chapters of the Sith and their origins.
Some would call this the Sith edition.
That's true. It was at one time jokingly called the Sith edition. When I had first submitted to Pablo the early drafts, I'd left out Sith because that's Lucas's domain, and I didn't want to tread on that. And also, the big authors too, like develop things in different directions. But when Lucas was out of the picture, then I brought the Sith back into it, and again tried to follow whatever Lucas's conception was. And a lot of this really does draw from Lucas's own themes. And you'll see in the endnotes, of which there are probably too many.
At least 100 pages, just knows.
That Lucas is the prime source for all of this. What did he want to tell? And I know he changes his mind. We all know he changes his mind a lot of things. But when it comes to core themes, like Lucas has been very clear about a few things in interviews that maybe not enough of us fans have read or paid attention to. So I put those in there as well so that you guys can see where this is drawing from. So I think I went far beyond your question.
Oh, that's nice.
And your question as well.
But that's an important aspect too. It's an important aspect because it's not like you're just introducing Buongiorno's thoughts per se. It's like there's a citation and a method behind the madness offered on just about everything within those plus 100 pages of endnotes that you have.
Yeah.
So that's just an important, just to back you up on that, is you are pulling from legitimate sources.
Well, it's George's world.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. We're playing in his sandbox, and you have to play by his rules. And if he changes the rules, it's, that can be frustrating. But you change accordingly. So, when he determined that the 1,000-year, the Sith began. Well, a whole book series came out of that. Jedi vs. Sith initially by Darko McCann, and then the Drew Karpyshyn series kind of, and that's all from a change in his conception. So that's that's how you turn lemons into lemonade, with things like that. With the midichlorians, I had a different conception of what they were until George started to reveal what his most current thoughts were. He did this with James James Cameron. They sat down for the history of science fiction documentary, and also in the Thank you. The Star Wars archives. Yeah, I told you my memory's not great.
That's why you know the editors.
Yeah. See, this is why I rely on these guys. But so in those two sources, Lucas really kind of lays it out. So you don't ignore that. That's something that you say, okay, well then, now that I know what his current conception is, I'm going to go back and make sure that it harmonizes with that. To me, that's important. It really is about honor and respect for all of the authors, the EU and and beyond.
So, what is some of your inspirations with all this as well?
So, all right. So in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which I think some of you may have read, Alan Dean Foster basically puts an idol of Cthulhu in the temple of Homogena. And so right off the bat, when the EU got started, there was this crossover with the Cthulhu mythos that H.P. Lovecraft and others had contributed to. I mean, H.P. Lovecraft started it. So right away, we were drawing back to the pulps. And Star Wars, its very origins, I mean, Lee Brackett was called, who wrote the screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back, was not only a Hollywood screenwriter for The Big Sleep and Last Goodbye and Reba Bravo. She was known in the 1930s, 1940s as the Queen of Space Opera. So these are the roots. The space opera and the pulps are the roots of Star Wars. Weird tales, and the EU has always drawn Archie Goodwin, Russ Manning, Roy Thomas. Yeah, Ray Thomas is from the Moody Blues. Roy Thomas, and others that came. Alan Moore, of course. They were all drawing from the pulps. So that was my main inspiration. Really, was to go back to that. And I was already a big fan of that stuff. I like literature from that era. So being able to bring that in, Edgar Rice Burroughs, big one. Mark Ashton Smith. So that's where this comes from.
So for the editors, what's some of the stuff that you really enjoyed working on with it?
I can go if you want.
You go first.
Think about it. Jedi Exiles, 100 Year Darkness, Second Great Schism. When I sort of found my way to your work, because I've just had my own fan thing going with just like documenting everything known about the 100 Year Darkness period. I assume one reason it never popped up in like the licensed literature or elsewhere is because it's really hard to write a novel where you have to say Dark Jedi over and over. You can't call it the 100 Year Darkness during the 100 Year Darkness because how long is this war going? So I was really looking forward, hey, another source, this supernatural encounters thing. And those chapters weren't there. They're in the table of contents, but where's the Sith chapters? I'm like, oh, no source here, okay. And then I find out about the Sith edition of the book, and then I see your announcement about Kyle, and I'm like, hey, in addition to being the most boring type of nerd and worshiping the Chicago Manual of Style, also just like, yeah, have copious research and notes on the 100 Year Darkness. So I sent Joe a 13,000 word digest on just everything that was confirmed in canon, and then some theories, but just clearly delineating where something was confirmed in a licensed source and where conjecture was made, and etc. Another of our editors, Edward, who is in a lot of ways your partner in crime from the beginning, he he leans towards like, let's pull everything in, let's like connect some new dots. So he's sort of like a maximalist, very much like Abel Pena. And I'm very much a minimalist because I'm like, I don't want to step on toes. I just want to document and a story or whatever. And so that ended up being a very good thing, I feel like, between Edward and myself.
Yes.
Yeah, there's very little Ed does not already know. So that 13,000 words was largely redundant, but got me to do it. So.
We did.
That 13,000 word document should be published in its own right. One other resource. So. And your question I find loaded because I cannot possibly answer it. It's been the past 3 years of my life going back and forth with you all, and that's my favorite aspects to all of this is working in a team environment. I am one of those people. I studied radiology for years. I English major for a minute, all that fun stuff. Musician too, yeah. Which you'll get a little bit of once we start getting Project C, I call it, Supernatural Encounters audio drama. You'll hear more about that stuff. But working with you guys has been the favorite part for me. In every single section, you can say some parts may be like, okay, well, maybe we have to have like a Tolkien style here where it's a lot of descriptions and maybe not all the actions happening on the page. I don't care. Every single line to me is like important. And then, all of a sudden, like maybe 500 pages later, oh, we have to come back to that. Hold on a second. Joe, I know you're busy and you had things to do today, but make some coffee, sir. We have to go into that conversation. And the actual process of taking on that as a whole is my favorite part of it. I don't think I can tell you who's my favorite characters anymore because I feel like they're, it's probably more so for Joe to say, but they're like a part of me now. And that's this and today. All of us being here, this is my favorite part of the entire project. And the fact that we have a chance to be here and celebrate your efforts. That's how I can answer that.
So
honestly.
we're going to turn it over to the audience in a moment, but just before, Kyle, if you can just take the mic again, and just tell a little bit about the audio drama that you have planned.
Oh, I'll be really quick, because there's other things I want to hear from you all. But several of you are members of our Discord, where we do as much as we can as far as moderation, making sure that is a peaceful community.
Yeah.
And I've already contacted a lot of you, and I'll be slowly pulling in volunteers to voice characters out of this as we spend probably the next 3 to 4 years with one of our editors, Robert Newman. He is the central narrator for it, and we will be providing all of the music in the background. A couple of our friends right up here in the front row very well may be part of all this. Wink, wink. You're curious, you can ask them about their experiences so far. But yeah, it's going to be potentially one of the largest audio dramas ever. I know we might approach that record as in Guinness. And so stay tuned.
And while we're on the subject of future projects, there's also Corey Carter is doing the Supernatural Encounters Atlas. And I don't know if you guys know this yet. I don't know if I announced it, but Kevin B. Gentis is doing the Alien Guide to Supernatural Encounters.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that is neat. And there's others many of you guys and others have told me about stories you're writing in this era, this new era that's kind of opened up, and that's great to hear. Artwork, maybe future cosplay. I mean, that's what it's all about: is opening up Star Wars, expanding that universe. For better or worse, Lucasfilm has decided to not do that. So hopefully we, all of us, collectively can continue to expand the universe.
Well, I'm also happy to be part of the project too, as I'll be voicing Talani. So one of the cosplays I've been planning to do was to do her as well. So future projects and a lot of green paint, I'm going to assume.
It'll be a challenge for the next LegendsCon.
Yes, and green contacts, which will be interesting. But if we could turn it over to the audience now, so if anyone has any questions, yeah.
I got 2 questions. The first one is, you mentioned something called a Sith edition. Could you explain what you're referring to?
Yeah, there was a colloquial term that I use after I released the beta edition, because when hyperspace closed and a lot of us were sort of left without answers as to what the futures of what these stories were, like Abel and myself and Rich and others, I released a beta version just to see if there was interest amongst you guys, because I couldn't otherwise have spent the time developing this. I had other projects, many that I've put on hold to get this done. So, but there was overwhelmingly positive support. And so that's when I jokingly called it the Sith edition, because I was going to bring, you know, the ancient Sith back into this thing, because they play a large role in the events, you know, that happened during the Cosmic Wars, which is 3 wars, incidentally. What was your second question?
And on the hardcover, there is an image of dragons, what looks like dragons. Without spoiling anything, could you tease what the context of that is?
Yeah, I can. So there's the concept of the firstborn, were the original alien races in the galaxy, and there were 80 of them. I don't list all of them because, you know, maybe you guys can add some of that, or, you know, future projects if the EU has ever continued, but the Dwinigwin were one of them. And so that is a conflict that occurs between them and some of their offspring races. That's what you're seeing in that, and that takes place during the first of the 3 cosmic wars, known as the Empyrean Wars. And it was a gorgeous image that Guillaume had illustrated, which I haven't thanked, by the way, Chris Cole and Guillaume Ducos, who done outstanding things. Outstanding illustrations. So I was like, which to pick for covers. That's why we ended up with so many covers, because I couldn't decide. They were all so beautiful. But the Dragons one, that's a favorite.
Yeah. I can't believe you were able to pronounce the native name for Star Dragon.
That's the 2 of us, yeah. That's a tough name to pronounce, because it's like a Welsh.
Oh,
Yeah.
Another question? Yep.
I have 2 questions real quick. The first one is like actually another piece of artwork. It shows like 6 beings who have these holocrons, and one maybe even has the yellow sign from the King in Yellow. I'm just kind of curious, like, if that's possibly like the immortal gods of the Sith. And the second question is the book supposedly talks about like the role like that Earth plays in the Star Wars universe, like in the role in the where humans actually come from, right? And kind of explains why we actually know the story in the first place, right? Yeah.
Those are great questions. Yes, to the first one, those are some of the immortal gods of the Sith, and they are very mysterious figures, and they're hard to know in terms of appearance and you know, personality, but they play a large role in the conflicts that emerge. But we had to have an illustration of them, at least in one of their forms, one of their incarnations. And there are meanings to the objects that they're holding, and I won't say what. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of hidden things that, for those of you who enjoy digging deep into that stuff, there's a lot to have fun with. But to your second question about Earth, see, this was another controversial one to tackle, but I felt the answer was right there in that first, the first film, where it says a long time ago. So we have time in a galaxy far, far away. So we have place. So Lucas basically is connecting Earth to the universe in some sense. It doesn't mean that we can cross over to them necessarily, but and then when you read the EU, and you have humans, and you have human customs, and you have like very Earth, not even just very like North American sorts of ways of speaking. I mean, Han says, "I'll see you in hell." That's not something. I mean, so for example, if you were to go to like a country that doesn't get a lot of tourists, like you're going to find a very different culture there, and that's just right here on our planet. So why are humans in a completely different galaxy, why do they have very Earth-like, or North American, United States-like customs and expressions? That was just a question that I felt should be answered. Why are there humans, in this galaxy? And I wanted to do it without violating the idea that there is a disconnect, from that. So that was insightful to find.
Yeah. Can I riff on that? Yeah. Yeah, and there's a long tradition of like Earth references in the expanded universe and elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so you were drawing on, you were kind of resolving some of like how many there were, and then like in a big part of this book, it's my understanding, is not saying like this is absolutely what happened. It's a conversation.
It's a conversation. It's dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I lean more on like the side of like being a historian, and like these are like, so like when Han says we'll see you in hell, someone who may or may not have resembled Harrison Ford said in some language that was translated to the viewer, right, for our sake, and then, so that's the side I lean on, and like this story is meant to be valid no matter what your interpretation is. It's not meant to make you feel excluded or exclude, like the current continuity or any of that. It's just an amazing work of love. Like,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in your own way, I think it's a satire on human nature itself. Yeah. It is, because we have, without giving spoilers,
right,
we have a universe that is crafted with the idea of perfection and the hope for long-term unity. And humans enter, and all of a sudden the world that we know Star Wars to be exists. So without going into it any further, I think that it's if you really read between the lines, there's a lot that you're saying, and I don't know if you have the time here today to really get into it.
No.
But that's the angle that I enjoy to get into it as well, is that there's a reason why there's conflict. There's more so than I won't comment. Okay. I'll probably start giving things away, but hopefully you all can understand what I'm trying to tell you here. And you see just the state of the human condition come out in this once perfect world.
And all its messiness.
There's a question down here somewhere. Yep.
In the introduction, you seem to indicate that the earlier beta version of Supernatural Encounters exists in universe. Is that what you think?
Yeah, that was that's borrowed right from Tolkien. When he changed the nature of the ring in The Hobbit. So the early editions of that, Bilbo basically gives it to not Bilbo. Gollum gives the ring, or rather gifts it to him as a birthday present. And once Tolkien realized that's not the nature of the One Ring, he changed it in the book, but then provided a retcon for why that version existed. That was the version that Bilbo told everybody. Because he himself was starting to feel the corruption of the ring. So I like that. I just like conceptually keeping things in universe. So people read the beta version. It's not something I love, but it exists. It's out there, and it's like I sound like Lucas with the original editions.
Quote to me was, "You can release it in my notes when I'm dead." I'm pretty sure is what you told me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of earlier editions, but it does exist. Some of you read it, and some of you enjoyed it enough that I continued to work on this. So I wanted to legitimize that. And say, so that's what this is. That's what the beta version is. It was this. When you guys read the introduction, you'll see what I mean about that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's a question back here.
We need to know: are you cosplaying as Splendid Act?
Oh. No, I'm Darth Vader, but pink version. So you can see the plate here in my lightsaber, and my companion, which is the Deathy McDeathface, my Death Star puppet.
I know Vader had a sister.
Now you do. Next year she'll be Talani.
Yes.
That corruption, is that why Bilbo basically stole the ring from Gollum? Because it seems to me like he already corrupted him, and then Bilbo, instead of giving it back, he kind of made him invisible, and he liked being invisible, and then, of course, had a confrontation with Gandalf, and
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So he lies about how he actually got it, and that lie is the premise of the version you get in those early Hobbit editions.
I was thinking about the same way with Anakin. You know, he thought he was doing the right thing by executing Dooku, and then he goes on to do worse and worse things until it becomes the Vader as we know him. It would have been nicely ironic if he had confronted Palpatine the same way and had the same choice that Luke had and struck him down, and instead, Palpatine, not only doesn't he kill Palpatine, he becomes his new apprentice.
Yeah, that's the tragedy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he could have gone that route, and due to fear and bad judgment, bad decisions, he didn't, and the galaxy suffered. But I like the fact that there's redemption there, despite that, because we make mistakes in life, sometimes grievous ones, but it doesn't mean we can't come back from that. That doesn't have to define who we are moving forward. So we've made a bad mistake, and now, what's our choice? Do we double down on that, or do we, find the light?
I agree.
Yeah. Anybody?
Yeah,
So-
question.
We're almost out of time, so last
We've got
question.
like 3 minutes left, so
Yeah.
lightning round.
So, what was something that you guys were like researching for the book, like a piece of lore you're trying to find like an explanation for it, but it eluded you for the longest time, perhaps? That was
You
absolutely
did something?
horrific.
You did.
The battery died.
Oh,
So,
that's why. It was
yeah,
pretty-
but-
Oh gosh, the La Factor X magazine.
Yes, the Factor X,
Yeah,
because
French
there's so
magazine.
much to do with that,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Red Bar.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I mean,
But the fact that it was
Maybe not.
in a foreign language, it was in French, and you had to get that translated, and it was still.
And we found out that translations weren't reliable.
I thought I had translations of it, but I had like a page here and like a page there, and I'm like, this doesn't seem complete. Like, I knew something was missing. So, shout out to Alvin Lelou, who provided that. Like, it was 10 pages of material, and again, so I had to rewrite stuff to make sure that it fit with that. Because not having it, I kind of went in a slightly different direction. So again, continuity first.
Mm-hmm.
Continuity is not an impediment to creativity. It's the opposite, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Continuity is a springboard for creativity. People who say that, it hampers, they just don't want to do the research. Ultimately, and look, that's fine. Not everybody's into that. That's great. When you're working in a shared universe, it does, it's your responsibility. It's somebody's responsibility to do it. And if the author doesn't have time, maybe the editor can, or he can reach out. Ann Crispin reached out to Mike Beidler and several people, where she would field them questions, fans, and they would,
Mike Stackpole and Michael B. Kubik now also helped me with that same trilogy with coordinating battle. And so that's.
Mike Stackpole himself got feedback. If you remember Throck from the first X-Wing book, which is just a passing reference to what happened to Luke's homestead. Yeah, that was from the Blackthorn 3D comics. When the first time I met Mike, which was back in '95, I asked him, and he said, yeah, that was a fan had read that and told me about it, and he brought it in. So that's the synergy. That's a living, expanded universe, and that's the beauty of it. When Michael Q. McDowell writes the Black Fleet Crisis, and Lucasfilm sends him the Wookiee storybook, he's writing about the Chewie's family, and he's going in a different direction, and they're like, no, here's Chewie's family. That's a kid's book from 1978, but that was what's so great about the EU is all of you could pick up a kid's book and it's connected to something 20 years later and something over there. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joe, for being here today. It's been really wonderful having you here at LegendsCon and being able to talk supernatural encounters. And thank you guys as well. You're amazing editors for doing all the work for the books and continuing Star Wars as well. And we look forward to Kyle's project.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can also, see Kyle on our podcast, Legends Library, of course. I'm going to shamelessly plug that again. So, and there's also a long interview we did with Joe recently, which is 3 hours. If you've got some time, check it out.
Any of those questions you might not have time for today.
Yes, exactly.
Where was that?
On Legends Library podcast. Yeah. So, great.